to start. You should have just gotten it, so please, if you're not comfortable, we could have you leave the meeting and you could watch the recording when it's done and submit your comments separately. But if you're comfortable with the meeting being recorded, just click got it. All right. So an overview of the Downtown Specific Plan process, just as a reminder, it's been a very long road to get us where we are today. It started in 2015. It had a racial equity relaunch in 2017 and 2018 when we brought some racial equity consultants on board to help us beef up our community engagement and also do some racial equity impact analysis of the proposed policies. In 2018 and 2019, we developed a preliminary draft plan and then a public review draft plan, as well as a draft environmental impact report, which received public comment through the end of 2019. Since then, we've been working on drafting the zoning that will help implement the plan. And then once that has received its public review, and the final draft plan and final EIR together to City Council for adoption. And I'm getting a notification that my connection is unstable. So if I happen to go in and out or you can't hear me, would you please just drop a note in the chat or unmute yourself and let me. So the objectives of the Downtown Specific Plan, there's an overarching vision, which is equity and access. Thanks. Recommendation to go no video. So if it gets worse, I'll turn my video off. Actually, you don't need to see me anyway. I'll turn it off right now. Then the main topic areas and objectives are economic opportunity, housing and homelessness, mobility, safety and connectivity, culture keeping, community health and sustainability, and land use and urban form. A large part of the purpose behind this plan is to add density to the downtown, our densest part of the city, to meet our housing needs, to grow employment that's accessible to our residents, more efficiently use our transportation capacity, and to grow city revenues that provide our community services. That's all while protecting and serving existing residents, with particular attention to residents of color, who government and other policies have prevented from benefiting from growth and development in the past. So we're trying to change that with this plan. So there are some other related policy objectives, not just from the Downtown Specific Plan, but other ones developed by the state and by the city. The State Housing and Community Development Department has housing goals that include removing barriers to housing production. The housing element of the City of Oakland, which is required by the state, but also is a key part of our housing strategy, is to increase housing production in general, to provide a diversity of housing types, to prevent displacement, to reduce racial housing segregation and provide affordable housing. We also have an equitable climate action plan that was adopted in recent years, and that includes specific land use policies requiring that specific plans work in tandem with the climate action goals to facilitate transit use by siting dense housing and employment near transit. And then we also have the goals to grow revenues for public service throughout Oakland, and that is showing up recently through the equitable and progressive business tax and the affordable housing infrastructure bond, which the City Council has voted to put on the ballot. So that includes generating taxes and boomerang funds in the downtown to fund services and affordable housing production citywide. And we know that because downtown is one of the centers of development and business, that it's basically the generator for much of the revenues that are used to provide services to the entire city. Yes, and I see Jeff also added in the chat, that's a good point. Assembly Bill 686, the requirement to affirmatively further fair housing. So that is related to, but separate to the goal to reduce racial housing segregation. Yeah, that's a good point to add that to that list. So when we talk about zoning, zoning is an important part of the Downtown Specific Plan, but it's not all of the Downtown Specific Plan. The Downtown Specific Plan includes a number of different implementation measures. So those include city investment of funds in housing and infrastructure. They include allocating staff to work on various programs. It includes compliance with mitigation measures that are developed in the Environmental Impact Report under the California Environmental Quality Act. They include creation of other funding sources like an enhanced infrastructure financing district, additional targeted studies, reassessment of impact fees and development fees. And so just as a reminder to everybody, I know that affordable housing came up as, unsurprisingly, one of the main issues at our last meeting. The Downtown Specific Plan includes an affordable housing strategy that includes updating the impact fees, developing the enhanced infrastructure financing district, and passing affordable housing bonds, as well as lobbying at the state and federal level for more funding. So the zoning amendments are one part of the larger Downtown Specific Plan strategy for affordable housing, as well as the other topic area. So the objectives for the Downtown Specific Plan were developed through many years of asking a wide variety of Oaklanders what they think is important for downtown Oakland. And the zoning amendments that we created all were designed to respond to those objectives and the details that we heard from community members. So to address those issues, we've taken a number of different approaches. Equity runs through all of the objectives. We mentioned, that's an overarching goal that addresses that's important in all of the different topic areas. So from focusing strategies to support the Black Arts Movement and Business District and its business owners, encouraging on-site affordable housing production, providing public restrooms to serve the needs of unhoused residents downtown, as well as the general public, and prioritizing community benefits like below market rate commercial space and employment programs to make sure that low-income Oaklanders and Oaklanders of color benefit from the jobs, business opportunities and services downtown. But then more specifically, in the economic opportunity goal, the zoning approaches that we've taken include adding flexibility in ground floor uses, creating an arts and culture overlay in the Black Arts Movement and Business District to support businesses and community serving organizations there, developing an employment priority combining zone to make sure that we are growing jobs, preserving industrial land to make sure that we're preserving good jobs with good benefits that are related to the port and other industry. We've created an artisan production commercial activity that is allowed throughout the downtown. And we've created a zoning incentive program, which we discussed quite a bit last week at our public meeting. That includes below market rate commercial space, employment training, and other workforce programs or funding for existing programs that support those. Regarding housing and homelessness, which, as Naomi mentions, is the primary request of most participants since the very beginning of the Downtown Specific Plan. It's obviously we're having a housing crisis and a homelessness crisis. So while zoning is not the best or only way to deal with housing and homelessness, it is one of the ways that we have. So the way we've approached it in the proposed zoning amendments are to increase residential density with community benefits, including affordable housing. That's in addition to raising funds for extremely and very low income housing through the affordable housing impact fees that would be levied on all new residential development, as well as the impact fees on commercial development. Allowing high density residential development in Victory Court, which is the southern Jack London area, permitting high density efficiency units, and then adding to the zoning incentive program affordable housing and public restrooms, both as benefits. To address the plan's goals for mobility, safety, and connectivity, the approach we've taken is to develop both green loop and freeway zones to improve the pedestrian experience, green the streets, and connect neighborhoods to one another. Infrastructure improvements, again, would be implementing infrastructure improvements, but we would be supplementing that with, oh, you lost me. Are you hearing me again?
Yeah, we hear you.
You hear me again. Okay, great.
We lost you for a little bit, but you're back.
What did you lose me at? Or what did I lose you at?
Just keep going. I think we're fine.
Okay. Yeah. So infrastructure improvements by DOT, but they would be supplemented with infrastructure improvements under the zoning incentive program. And it also includes the extension of streets into Victory Court to allow development there. To address culture keeping, already mentioned the arts and culture overlay in the Black Arts Movement and Business District, or BAMD, to protect and foster a broader definition of cultural uses. So not just theaters and performance spaces, but also, Black-owned businesses that support the goals of the BAMD, community organizations, that are serving, that sort of meet the intent of the BAMD. We've also developed art and garage district zoning that is designed to protect artists and small scale manufacturers. We've relaxed rules to permit entertainment and performance venues, so made it easier for larger venues to get permits. We've permitted artisan production commercial activities by right throughout the downtown. That's a different category from industrial. We've also added to the zoning incentive program below market rate commercial space and infrastructure improvements. Regarding community health and sustainability, we've added a sea level rise overlay zone to allow housing while protecting against climate change, particularly in that Jack London Victory Court area. The green loop, again, to encourage walking and biking and use of recreational space, while at the same time adding in standards to protect the Lake Merritt Channel so that it can be used for recreation and development, and nature is maintained as a resource there. And then finally, addressing our land use and urban form goals, we've proposed revised design standards for towers, storefronts, the green loop, and other key frontages. Those will also be fleshed out further in the objective design standards that the city is working on now. And then there will be an industrial transition in the Jack London area in order to protect the industrial area and protect the jobs that come with it, which often are accessible to Oaklanders and well paid. And then a transfer of development rights program that protects historic buildings and can help fund maintenance. So those are shown in 3 different components. One is a set of updated land use activity regulations, and those include a series of maps which are available on the website. We've also received some requests for an interactive version of those maps and are working on that now. They also include special districts, many of which I just described. And then the third component is the zoning incentive program and development standards. And as a reminder, the zoning incentive program was developed in response to community concerns about the idea of allowing further development downtown without getting community benefits in return. So the way that the city identified a method for doing this, for ensuring that the community gets community benefits in return for any development, any additional development, is to create this voluntary incentive program. So as a result, in order to make this program work, we've proposed only allowing increased development with participation in this program. So the zoning incentive program is in addition to impact fees for housing, capital improvements, and other impact fees. And then finally, the process to review the we've had a series of topic-specific public meetings, 3 of those. We've had hearings of the Zoning Update Committee and the Landmarks Preservation Advisory Board, and those have been continued. We are having this Community Advisory Group meeting and then having a series of focused stakeholder meetings, including with Chinatown and the Black Arts Movement and Business District, hopefully also with the Art and Garage District. And we also have just sent out some online surveys that were
Joanna, we lost you there for about
Oh, okay,
40 seconds or so.
40 seconds.
The last thing you said was online surveys.
Thank you, that's helpful. Okay.
Oh, we lost you again.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, keep telling me. If we need to, we can always turn it over to somebody else.
Yeah.
So the online survey is, it tries to present briefly the key elements of the zoning amendments, but also refers people to the website with all of the detailed information and then asks people to weigh in. Tiffany, the dates have not been published online yet because the meetings have not been scheduled. We're still in the process of scheduling the meetings. And then the chalkboard survey will be, I believe one of them is going to be at the Lincoln Rec Center in the park there. And then the other one is going to be in Uptown. And Steve Snyder, you could probably tell me the name. I forget the name of the little plaza that's up on Broadway and
Franklin Square.
Uptown Square. Okay, thank you. So those will be actual broader questions, but also to, okay, dropping out again.
You're back.
Thank you.
Right.
But also to give information about this process to people who otherwise might not know about it. So we'll also have a QR code that people can go to learn more about the downtown specific plan and the zoning amendments. So that's it for process. I am going to move on to the key concerns that we've heard so far. So we have received a lot of comments already in the last few months since we published the draft amendments. And again, these are draft amendments. We want your comments on them. Many of the comments have been from members of the CAG working group, which many of you are here. That's a segment of the community advisory group who've been working independently together to share feedback with the city. So we've heard a number of those. We've heard some comments from other folks as well. So these are the ones that we've heard most frequently. This isn't a comprehensive list of everything we've heard, though we are keeping track of everything that we've heard in a spreadsheet that we will make public, like we've made all the other ones public. And these are not universal, but these are the ones that we have heard most frequently. So we'll try and address these as we can. I might invite some other members of the team to jump in to talk about them a little bit more. One of the main ones that we've heard is that some community members are concerned that we are not down zoning to extract more benefits from development, or that we're not making participation in the zoning incentive program mandatory. So starting with the zoning incentive program, because that's, even though that's just one piece of the zoning, of the zoning amendments, it's gotten a lot of attention and it's one of the areas where we can get more community benefits. So there's been a recommendation that rather than starting with a baseline of what the zoning is today, is that instead we reduce the zoning below the intensity of the zoning below where it is today, so that in order to get back to that place or higher, a developer would need to participate in the zoning program. So essentially making participation in the zoning incentive program mandatory in order to get where they are today or higher. And I see Naomi is clarifying down zoning with up zoning in other areas. So our understanding is that this is not a legal thing that we can do under State Bill 9, which doesn't allow a decrease in intensity unless, as Naomi just said, there is upzoning elsewhere. However, the zoning incentive program was developed to respond to the community's desire not to upzone without without requiring benefits. So we haven't actually upzoned anywhere else. Right now, the way the ZIP is structured is that it only allows increased intensity with the added cost of community benefits. So it's not by right density. So I don't know if anybody else from the city team, Brian, if you want to add anything to that. Did I explain that properly?
Yeah, no, you explained that perfectly. So it's SB 330. That was the first law that basically said you can't downzone in areas without corresponding. There can't be a no net loss, right, of density without correspond. So you can't downzone without correspondingly upzoning somewhere else within the area. Then SB 8 came along and just made some clarifying provisions to SB 330. So when we talk about SB 8 or SB 330, it's really kind of two companion bills that came in different years, but are really the same law under the government code. And I think as the city, we're seeing San Francisco right now run into a lot of problems with HCD and identifying opportunity sites through their housing element and providing opportunities for housing in the city. I'm not so sure we want to be in a place policy-wise where we want to be a no net new jurisdiction anyways, because, really the idea with all of these state housing laws is to facilitate residential development. It's something that is very important to HCD, very important to the state legislature through several bills that have passed this session and sessions going all the way back 5 to 6 years.
And just to give a little clarity too to what Joanna was saying, the extra density achieved through the ZIP is not considered an upzoning because it's not allowed by right, and that's according to Brian. So really, it's the base zoning that is the main concern. The ZIP does not count as an upzoning.
Thanks. So I am also seeing that James asked how many existing high-rise developments in the downtown have requested bonus intensity. That's one of the questions that we've been asking. And so we're getting that data together and we will send that out to you all probably in the next few days. So we have 2 more slides after this one, and then we'll go to questions. So we'll sort of try and present what we've heard so far and what our take on it so far has been, and then we're happy to discuss it. The next piece on the zoning incentive program is that there seems to be confusion about how the program is created. This program is developed on a concept called value capture. And I think a lot of people are seeing it as an impact fee. So an impact fee is used to address the impacts of development. So if development, for example, the affordable housing impact fee, the idea is that new residential development creates a need for additional affordable housing and market rate housing because of all of the services that it creates a need for, creates a need for more jobs, which creates a need for more housing. So it's really looking at what is the actual impact of development. Or I guess the other option is just there's an existing need, right? We know that there's an existing need for affordable housing. We're in a housing crisis. We need market rate housing. We need affordable housing at all levels. The zoning incentive program is not designed to respond to either one of those exactly. Obviously, it responds to the need for new housing and affordable housing. But the way it's developed is it's a value capture program. So the amount of value that we would be able to get for community benefits is based on the value created by allowing additional development capacity. So the idea behind this program is that we capture a portion of the value created by allowing the additional density. So by allowing additional residential units or allowing additional non-residential or office square footage, above what they would normally be allowed, that's an incentive for the developer. And it allows them to increase the amount of money that they gain. And then and then we take a portion of that. So we can't take more than the amount that is created by the additional intensity that the city is allowing them, because it's just not there. It's not possible. And we can't capture more of it than would create an incentive. Sorry, if we captured more of it, then sorry, this is hard for me to explain. We can't, if we captured more of it than was an incentive for the developer to build, then they're not going to build. They're not going to build up to the dense height or intensity that we want them to in the downtown, because it's important to have a dense downtown for all of the other goals that we've talked about. So I would be happy if somebody else from my team wanted to jump in and clarify that, because I did a terrible job of explaining it. Yeah, actually, Linda, do you want to just like clarify that?
Okay. No, I think you did fine when you came back around. And the simple answer was to capture a share of the additional real estate value that could be contributed to pay for community benefits. The idea is you want to capture a share of the additional value while retaining incentives for the developer and the landowner to build at the higher density. And that was particularly an issue when, in fact, as we discussed at earlier meetings, currently none of these higher density projects are feasible. So there are feasibility issues of getting the development. So some incentive for projects to become feasible and then get built would be what would generate the community benefits.
Thank you, Linda. Thanks for explaining that. My apologies for the mangled
No,
explanation.
you sounded fine.
So that's one concern. Another concern is that understanding that this is a value capture program, well, maybe we're not charging developers enough of the value captured. The way that the program is designed is based on the idea that a third of the cost would go to the developer to be an incentive to actually participate in the program and build more densely. A third of it would go to the land cost, which would be increased because the value has been increased by the added intensity that we're allowing. And then 1/3 of it would go to community benefits. So there's some concern about that formula, the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Maybe there's a better way, maybe there's a better balance there. And then finally, we've heard concern that the zoning incentive program will compete with and detract from the state density bonus program. So the density bonus program is what James was asking about how many units had been developed through that program. And so Linda, who just spoke, has completed some additional analysis that is a comparison of the zoning incentive program and the density bonus program. And she could potentially talk more about that later if people have some questions about it. But generally, they're two different programs. They offer different incentives to developers, and that would encourage developers to participate in one versus the other, depending on what they were trying to achieve. And they provide different benefits to the community. The state density bonus program is entirely focused on affordable housing. The zoning incentive program includes affordable housing, but also has some of the other community benefits that we don't have a mechanism to get any other way, such as below market rate commercial space and public restrooms. So again, there's a link to that, and actually let me drop that in the chat right now for those of you who want to take a look at Linda's write-up of the additional analysis that she did to compare those. So a project could participate in the zoning incentive program, or they could participate in the state density bonus program, or they could do both, which is maybe the best case scenario is that they would participate in the zoning incentive program, provide some of those benefits that we wouldn't get any other way, and then do the state density bonus on top of it, in which way they would they would end up getting additional bonus that could go above the maximum that was studied under the environmental impact report. And Naomi says, when you do both the ZIP and I think state density bonus, how do they interact? You can do them both. You would do the zoning incentive program first, and then you would do the state density bonus on top of it. And you would get a bonus on the amount that the zoning incentive and the base on top of each other would be
Joanna, we lost you again.
Oh,
You said,
okay.
when you get,
Thank
you
you.
would get a bonus on top of.
Thank
what
you.
portion of the ZIP?
You can hear me again?
Yeah, we can hear you.
again now. So start
Okay.
with, you get a bonus on top of what portion of the ZIP?
Yeah. So you get the bonus for the ZIP, and that creates the new baseline from which you calculate the state density bonus. So that gets us both the highest possible density and the highest possible benefit to the community, both in terms of impact fees and units produced on site. The impact fees would not be paid on the state density bonus portion, but because they don't need to be under the state density bonus, but they would be paid on everything else in the base below that. Yes, Naomi, also the highest possible buildings, possibly, or they just might be smaller units. Let's see. So let me just try and relatively quickly go through the next two slides, and then we can turn it over to more questions. So some of the concerns we've heard about the transfer of development rights program are the desire to allow transfers from standalone historic buildings. The draft had originally said historic buildings within an area of primary or secondary importance. But we know that there are historic buildings that are outside those that are important as well. And also to eliminate conditional use permit requirement. So we think that those are good suggestions that we're happy to work on. It'll be a little complicated to figure out how to record it without a conditional use permit, but that's something that we can work through. And then there's also similar to the zoning incentive program, there's a desire to start from a lower intensity than currently exists. And then buy up to the intensity that exists now or to the intensity that is under the zoning incentive program. And we have similar concerns, basically the same concern for doing that for the transfer of development rights program that we would have for doing for the zoning incentive program. And then for the development standards, we've also heard concern about increased height in the fire alarm building, which is a historic site right next to the historic county courthouse. And then also in historic areas. So that is also something, the reason for the increased height on the fire alarm building, for those who haven't been at the prior meetings where we've discussed it, that site is intended to be used for, at least under the city's current exclusive negotiating agreement, for a jazz museum. So it'd still be used for a public use, a public process that would help anchor the Black Arts Movement and Business District. It's not intended to be used for, say, a high-rise condominium, but still we can discuss what might be the right height for that site. And then historic areas, again, with the caveat that we are concerned about the concept of down zoning when it comes to the state's goals for maintaining the current level of intensity in the zoning. And then some of the concerns we've heard about the special districts. There's a suggestion that employment priority sites, as well as other locations downtown, include employment uses other than office, such as life sciences and other research and development uses. There's a recommendation that cultural affairs staff and cultural affairs commission be involved in identifying arts and culture uses. We agree the Cultural Affairs Commission has reviewed the zoning language, which includes definitions of art and culture. And I think as we move forward with the development of a program for tenanting and leasing the below market rate commercial space, would absolutely have cultural affairs staff and the Cultural Affairs Commission weigh in on the criteria for who would be offered those below market rate spaces. And then there's concern that the city needs to more comprehensively address vacant retail spaces. So that is something that we are doing as we can in the zoning by encouraging or by relaxing restrictions on ground floor retail space to make them available to a larger range of businesses. But we know that we also need to do more work outside of that. So perhaps the program that we create for leasing tenanting the below market rate commercial space, maybe that could be used for addressing vacant retail spaces in existing buildings. So that's something that we need to work further with economic and workforce development on. And maybe something outside the realm of zoning. So I am going to stop talking now. And Naomi, I see your comment. It's not down zoning to keep the height as it was in Lake Merritt BART's specific plan. Yep, understood. It is not down zoning. That is correct. But I am going to turn it over to David to take some questions and then we can have some discussion. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and turn it over to David.
Great, thank you very much. I think I know many of you, but if you don't know me, my name is David Early and I'm a consultant with PlaceWorks. We're based in Berkeley, but have done quite a bit of work in Oakland and have assisted in the creation of some of the zoning amendments. There's one question in the chat that I'm going to ask in a minute just to let others formulate their questions, but mostly please do not put more questions in the chat. I'm going to ask you to raise your virtual hand. If for some reason you don't have a virtual hand, you could type in the chat, I have a question, and then I will call on people to ask their questions. So there was a question that asking, and this is a question really for you, Linda, and I think it might be a couple of parts. The question from Hiroko Kurihara asks, are the amounts of the in lieu fees based on the value of the real estate? Now, Hiroko, maybe you could clarify. I believe your question is wondering whether the ZIP regulations and payments are based on real estate values. And I think it's very important to understand that although the ZIP does have an ability to pay in lieu fees, it's not an in lieu fee project or fee. It's really a fee that's value capture, as Joanna said. So Hiroko, can you just clarify, is your question about other in lieu fees that are being paid, or are you wondering about the ZIP program and whether it's based on real estate values?
It's related to the ZIP program as well as the community benefits program. And my understanding from the last meeting we had with Ed, and I may have completely misunderstood this, and that's why I'm asking, is that the value capture is based on specific locations within the downtown. In
That's
other
right.
words,
So let me try and answer a couple parts of that. So
okay,
the ZIP program is the program by which we are trying to capture community benefits. So you just said you're interested in both. Those are a single thing. There is a ZIP program that is intended to capture the value of like extra value being created through upzoning, through voluntary upzoning, and a portion of that value is being captured and being used for community benefits. So those
Right.
are, I think, the same thing when you ask that question. And it's
Okay.
absolutely true that those payment amounts are going to be determined by the location where the project is, and the location dictates the value of the real estate. And so the value is what's being captured. And as Joanna explained, it's the plan is to capture 1/3 of the value, the notion being that the other 2/3 would go to the owners of the land and or the developers, but 1/3 is captured to go to the city. And it is very much specific to the location.
and how were those percentages determined?
The 1/3?
2/3? Yeah.
Linda Hausrath suggested that with the theory that the development community, both the development community and the existing owners of land also need to benefit. There has been some discussion as to whether the city's share, if you will, could be higher. And I think that's a thing that that could be worked out later. There comes a point, obviously, if you charge it, if I'm the developer and I'm going to make exactly the same amount of money, whether I develop the small building or the large building, then maybe I'll just do the small building because there's no financial benefit for me. But one could argue that instead of taking 33%, maybe we take 60, 70, 80%. Perhaps that would still be of interest to people.
Yeah, I guess
Linda,
I have.
do you want to add anything to that?
I think you covered it, and part of the issue related to that 1/3 share also relates to wanting to have an incentive, as he was mentioning, for the higher density development. The larger the share that goes to community benefits, then the incentive is reduced over time. And so that's the balance we're trying to take here, because all of this was based on real estate feasibility analyses of the development at the maximum for the base, and then development at the maximum under the zip density, more intense, so that you could see what additional value was created. So that was done for all of the combinations of base and zip densities that are proposed in this program and in the plan. And then that information was then also mapped. When you talked about the map, there are actually maps in the draft zoning text, as well as in our economic report, that have 3 benefit areas identified, because otherwise you're going to end up with a system where every parcel or every parcel within a combination of base and density would have a different requirement. So from an implementation point of view, the intent for the city was to make the implementation much more workable. So the range of value captures that were fairly similar were grouped into a benefit area. And so there were 3 benefit areas, basically. And so both the draft zoning that shows the requirement of how much additional development you get for different, how much additional development you can get for different assumptions about the density. Those, as well as the in lieu fee, are all equated back to that value capture number.
Great.
The
Thank you,
in lieu
Linda.
fee is not a separate analysis. Both doing it on site and contributing the money instead of doing on site were all done based on the same results. And it's just one is in dollars and one is in space density.
And
that
I
it all?
see that Hiroko has added a concern about that. We're in the chat. We're going to try and take questions right now as opposed to comments. But Hiroko, your comment will be noted from the chat, and if we have time, when we get to discussion, we can talk about that further. I see Jeff Levin has his hand up, I presume with a question, so we'll go to Jeff.
2, actually, if that's okay. The first one's fairly quick. Since we haven't seen any of the prototype or pro forma models or the working through, I'm wondering whether the analysis looked at the impact of the share of value going to developers, like how that actually impacted their rate of return, and specifically the rate of return to the developer. So I don't know if that was part of your analysis or not, Linda.
That's in the pro forma, yes.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll be able to see that work at some time. I know we talked about this last week, so I won't rehash it. I know it's been requested.
Yeah.
The second question, I and other people have asked a number of times. I've been to, I think this is at least my 4th presentation or discussion on the ZIP, couple at the zoning update committee, the community meeting. We have yet to see anything that actually walks through an example for any particular site of how the ZIP would work and what the trade-offs between the incentives and the benefits are. I've tried to work one out, and so I'm wondering if I can take just a short minute and just make sure that I'm understanding correctly how this works, because we have not seen any walkthrough of this. So
As the facilitator, I'll say, Jeff, if you've got a way you want to show that and just to make sure you're understanding it, I think that's perfectly appropriate.
Sure. If somebody lets me share my screen.
Are you
Um,
able to share your screen? Does it
I
give you an
think
option?
you would have to be given that right.
The host
by
would have
the-
to give me the option to do
Yeah,
that.
so Kalila, I believe, is the.
I think,
Yes,
or maybe I
one
can. Actually, it's giving me the ability to do so. Is that okay if I do
Yeah,
that?
please do it.
Okay.
Right.
And Jeff, if you could limit this to 3 to 5 minutes, that would
Yeah,
be-
fairly quick.
Yeah.
So the example I looked at is the one that was actually in a couple of the public presentations that at least showed how to look up the base zoning versus the zip zoning. This was a parcel at 592nd Street. At least I believe that's what it's pointing to, which I think is the block where Bed Bath & Beyond is located. And I took a look at that. It's actually a single one block parcel, so it's about 60,000 square feet. The base zoning on that parcel is base intensity area 2, and so it currently permits 1 unit per 900 square feet of land with a maximum height of 45 feet. And so I calculated that as permitting a maximum of 66 total units at base zoning. It's in zip intensity area D. You have to look at a second map to see what zip intensity area it's in. And that zoning permits 1 unit per 110 square feet and a maximum of 175 feet in height, which would yield 545 total units with the zip as the maximum allowable. And that incremental density increase of 479 units would be a 725% increase in density. And I think I saw a presentation that actually cited it at that percentage. And this is in zip area R-C. Linda mentioned there are 3 different zip zones. This is in zone C. And, you know, there's a table that shows trade-offs. So, you know, if you do moderate income, you have to produce maybe 1 or 2 more units. If you do extremely low, something less. I looked at 2-bedroom low income unit, which in that zip area for 1 2-bedroom low income unit, that entitles a developer to 75 more market rate units under this program. And therefore, to get 479 units, a development would only need to provide 7 low-income 2-bedroom units. So the affordable units would be about 10% of the base units and only 1.3% of the total units in the project. And I think it's less than 2% of the incremental units. So you get a big jump in density by providing essentially 2% inclusionary on that increment. And then I just wanted to compare to state density bonus, because I think there's multiple ways of looking at this. Under the state density bonus, providing 10% of the base zoning at lower income rents earns a developer a 20% increase in density. I think Linda used a 5% very low income example. The state density bonus, of course, has a range of options that go actually up to a 50% increase in density. So it's a little difficult to use just one case as an example, because there's multiple scenarios under state density bonus. You know, 20% of the base units at low income get to a 35% increase in density. So I just think, you know, in fairness, if we're going to compare ZIP and state density bonus, we should be clear that the example in Linda's comparison is only one scenario under the state density bonus.
Well, let
Yeah.
me,
Jeff,
are you
thank
done
you
with
for that.
that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's-
so I think, Linda should probably, Linda, could you start with just, does Jeff correctly understand how the program would work? I think that's the fundamental question.
Yeah, I have a state density bonus and comment as well.
But-
It sounded like it. I don't have all the spreadsheets in front of me, but that is essentially, we have done a similar kind of thing where, you know, how big is the site? Just like you did, what would the density, how much more? And in that area, there are a lot of very high densities. So that does sound reasonable. I don't have, like I say, the printouts all in front of me. That area also with that high of a density, we'll be shifting. One of the things that the feasibility analysis looks at by running the base and then running the zip densities, that's going from a pretty low density development, which is less costly, to a very high density development, which is more costly to build because the construction type is changing. So to the extent, I'm pretty sure that when we look at this one, there are certain blocks in that part of Jack London West, so I'm not sure exactly where the line goes here, but where that and other actually cases in Jack London East or in Victory Court, where the shift in construction type raises the cost significantly without a similar shift in the revenues by location. So what happens is what this may be reflecting, we could take a look at it, is that the value capture per unit, in this case, because it's housing, per unit is lower than it would be if you were going from a density that had a similar construction type to a higher one with similar construction type. So the per square foot, which is probably shown on our table, I don't have that in front of me, will be lower. Now it's true because you're building a lot of additional development. The total amount takes into consideration, you would get more, you get some benefit, not on a per square foot or per unit basis, but you get a benefit on the total amount of development that you're, in terms of the other things they're paying, like the impact fees and everything else. So one of these where it changes the building type from a very low density to a very high density usually has a per unit and a per square foot value capture that is lower from buildings that are not, or situations that are not changing similarly. So by picking one like this, you will see on a per unit basis lower benefits, and that's probably what you're picking up there.
And Linda, that's borne out also by the fact that Jeff's example is in area C. It's R-C, and they're all called A, B, and C. And
Right.
C is always the one with the lowest newly created values. The A
Exactly.
areas have the highest created values, the B areas have the middle created values, and the C areas are the lowest. So Jeff, I agree with Linda that your math does look right here. I think you do understand the system. And it is also true that if this were an area R-A, then you would have to build more units to get the same benefit. But because this is R-C, the values created are relatively low. And it seems like it is partially for the reason Linda said, that you're going from a lower, cheaper building type to a taller, much more expensive building type. And that expense, then the expense of making the building, means that there's less profit for the community to reap, less profit for the developer.
Yeah, and I think
that's
that's why we'd like to see the pro formas, because of course factored into that, and I assume that works through in the pro forma, the per unit construction cost goes up, but the per unit land cost goes down significantly when you get that big an increase in density. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts to it.
And
Right.
I would just really strongly urge you to take 3 or 4 examples, one that's just, type 5 to type 5 and another that's type 5 to type 1. You've talked about the implications of those different kinds of construction type changes, but actually to prepare some examples so that when you go back to the ZUC and when you go to the Planning Commission, people can see how this will actually work out, because it's very, very abstract. And I think, for a lot of people, until they see an example worked out, they're not going to understand how this thing works at all.
No.
And I wanted to add one thing.
We're working on that.
I wanted to
But
add
then
one. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Linda. Go ahead.
I have one more comment too about the state density bonus. It is true there are combinations. We separately we've calculated the cost per bonus unit under all those combinations. And the one that we used here, the 20% density for very low income, is the lowest cost of all the combinations that you could potentially use. And since we're in a high cost location high rises, that one made the most sense, but there are other options. We also, it'd be interesting to see what the city can identify if there were other state density bonuses used already in the DOSP area. The one I'm most familiar with, there was actually only one huge high rise that I was fairly familiar with. That one used this 20% and very low income. They, I guess, calculated also that it is the least cost alternative. That is a little also dependent or influenced by the extent to which they may have got concessions and waivers on regulatory matters, which can also vary a lot. But the calculation of just the costs for doing affordable in that, in the DOSP area, we actually did figure so that this is a relatively good comparison. You could do the others as well, but we hadn't seen any yet that have used that, or in some cases, the cost per additional bonus unit gets quite high.
Okay.
Yeah, I would
And I just-
also
Okay.
say, if I could add as well, that the ZIP program project would pay the affordable housing impact fees where the density bonus one would not, as well as so that's also something that should be looked at as well when you're looking at the total of what's being developed for both affordable housing fees and the ZIP fees as well.
Yeah, you may, in that report that I think they released today, follow-up analysis we did, that highlights actually a number of differences because they're different programs. But it looks at differences in terms of results for market rate and affordable housing supply, and then the resources for affordable housing. And the resources for affordable housing are heavily influenced by the fact that the ZIP would require payment of the impact fees on both the base and the ZIP density. Under the state density bonus, there are no impact fees paid to the city. So that makes a pretty big difference. And then that money, the impact fee money that would then go into the residential impact fee money, which is most of what's paid, goes into the city's affordable housing trust fund. And the city then has the ability, as you know, Jeff, but maybe not everyone does, to leverage those monies to get other state, local, county monies. And their experience had been up to $7 for every additional dollar, for every local dollar. And that assumes some programs that are low on funding right now. So they're in the range of what they're projecting of at least $4 for every local dollar. So those impact fee monies that go to housing, the majority of impact fee monies will be going to housing when it's paid, that then gets leveraged. And so the amount of money available for affordable housing in Oakland becomes quite large. They don't have, however, it's not that requirement like the density bonus to do the requirement on site. So our table kind of shows how the units built, market rate and affordable, and the resources for affordable housing in Oakland differ between the two programs.
Great, thank you. Let's take another question. This one from James Van, who's had his hand up for a little while.
There's two questions. One, from the discussion with Hiroko, I understood that the part of the proposal would, in value capture and return to the developer, would refund some of the impact fee money to the developer as an incentive. If that's true, would the city agree to that policy? Because the city requires and looks forward to the impact fees for a number of uses, and to share that.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but that was, I think that that would need. go before the city council. Go ahead, Linda, and straighten me out.
Yeah, no, I think I understood you. Make sure under the ZIP, the way it's calculated, all of the impact fees would be paid on the base development and on the additional development to get to the ZIP. Under the state density bonus, the city does not collect impact fees on either the base or the state density bonus is very much oriented toward reducing the costs of housing to be able to get those affordables in there. So one of the things they're doing is saying you don't have to collect the impact fees. So there are no impact fees paid on the development under the state bonus program. Is
Okay.
that clear
Yeah,
enough? Or-
except for the basic development, the impact fees would apply to the basic development that is being proposed by the developer before the bonuses from the state density bonus. Is that correct? I mean,
Well, no, in fact, that's an error we made. The table that I had at the last meeting.
No, Linda, I think what James, I think, was asking is, yeah, if a developer doesn't do the density bonus and just does a regular development of what's allowed by right now, yeah, so the developer pays affordable housing impact fees, transportation impact fees, and capital improvement impact fees. And then if they do the density bonus, state density bonus, then they do not pay affordable housing impact fees, but they do pay transportation impact fees on all the units, and they pay capital improvement impact fees on the market rate units.
okay.
And I think the reason for that is that when they use density bonus, they then get to double count essentially the affordable units that they produced in order to get the density bonus. They can then turn around and also count them as affordable units on site in lieu of paying the impact fee.
Okay.
Yeah,
the-
just to confirm that is correct. Jeff's interpretation there is correct.
All right. My final question actually is a comment. Did we look at a program that would just assure that each development contributes something to the affordable housing shortage? The city really has a crisis going. How can we assure that we're going to increase the number of affordable units in the city?
Well, so
That's
James,
where we have-
I'd like to get a city staff person answer that. The fact is that every project does pay into that affordable housing fund. That's how the city already does that. So maybe Joanna or Neil could speak to that a little bit more, or Laura. But yes, the city already has a mechanism by which every project helps to address the city's affordable housing shortage. Joanna?
That's accurate.
Yeah, I'll add, I think, and Joanna mentioned this earlier in her presentation, that, really the city is looking at a number of tools to pay for affordable housing. And affordable housing impact fees are never going to be able to pay enough, for the amount of affordable housing that is needed in the city of Oakland. And neither is the ZIP program as well. It's a tool to be added with the affordable housing impact fees, as well as you all hopefully know, there's this bond measure that is out for fall for people to vote on, which would be contributing a huge amount of money that can go to affordable housing. So there's other resources that the city is looking to provide affordable housing, knowing that essentially we need more money for that to happen.
And I gotta say, I think it's very frustrating that I'm hearing this frustration from others, that when Linda does the math, you end up adding 500 units and only 7 of those are affordable. The problem is, according to Linda's calculations, that's the amount of value that's being created. So now it's only a third of the value that we're capturing. You could argue we should capture more of it. You all might look at Linda's math and think it's incorrect and should be done differently, but it is just math. So you can say, well, gee, I wish you could get 5 or 10 times more calculations. That's more than can be extracted from the extra value that's been created by this voluntary upzoning. So Linda's job, as we gave it to her, was to calculate what can be extracted from the extra value that's being created by upzoning. Linda did all that math, and this is what she came up with. It wasn't necessarily intended as an impact, a program to offset impacts. It was intended to be the capture of 1/3 of the value created by the upzoning. And that's the math that Linda has done. And I too find it frustrating. I wish that we were creating more value so we could capture even more, but according to Linda's calculations, we're simply not. Jeff, I see your hand up again, but I just want to ask if there's anybody else who has a question. We're supposed to end in about 10 minutes, and we could, I think, probably go over a little longer, but is there anybody who wants to raise the hand for a question? I see, Joanna, your hand also. If there's not other questions, why don't we take Joanna and then we'll take Jeff.
Sure. It was just one additional point that I think Laura actually has spoken to maybe at prior meetings, which is just that, you know, the other thing about both the impact fees and the zoning incentive program is that the funds that we get from this are one-time funds. Whereas if we are building dense new employment, dense businesses, we are building a revenue, a city's like tax base. We're building revenues that are ongoing funds, and those will help with city services in the downtown, elsewhere in the city. Those can help with maintenance, which impact fees can't help with. And so those are an ongoing source of funding that we'll be able to get by growing the density and the employment in the downtown. So we need to like measure that in addition to the actual one-time funds that we're getting.
And I see what I'm going to interpret as a question in the chat from Naomi, wondering about things like rents collected over the decades. And I think we can answer that to say that Linda's math is based on current asset values. The value of an asset to some degree is set by what people think might be collected in rents over time. But at the same time, Linda, and you should maybe comment on this further, I believe Linda's math is all done based on the existing value and the future, the new value created in today's dollars to compare the base project versus the ZIP project. And it only accounts for things like future rents insofar as those are included in those current values that are created. Linda, do you want to add anything about that relative to Naomi's question?
Well, I think Summer, maybe I would just say that the analysis was done in 2021-22 dollars. And our initial run of all of these showed that given the high construction costs, that a lot of which happened around 2021, big increases, and the issues with rent, obtainable rents, and then now the effects of the pandemic, that none of the developments with those dollars were feasible. There was no land value, it was negative. So then we said, well, you can't really do analysis when there's no value to capture. And so then we worked to create feasible projects, basically, and then say when development was feasible, what would be the value capture? And I think I mentioned before, in most cases, it requires about a 20% difference between revenues and costs, a closure of about 20% in order to make most of these projects work, particularly the ones where you're going from low rise to a big new building. So that's a sort of another issue here, that we're also talking about future, well, it's in current dollars, but it's future situation, not today, because the feasibility has to improve before you're going to have any value to capture. And that relates to some extent to the share of value you want to capture for community benefits, because the more you capture, the less residual there's left to provide an incentive to the developers and landowners. So the more you capture, you could be slowing down the time at which feasibility hits. So there's that dynamic that makes it more complicated, because if you just did current situations, you'll say there's nothing to capture. But we all know, hopefully it's going to get better. But that's something to keep in mind. And not only is it nothing to capture, but there's many uncertainties right now. So, but with that in mind, you have to think about the fact that we're not starting with a pot of lots of value that could happen tomorrow. And then look at, okay, once we get there, what's it going to take? We don't really identify how long it's going to take to get there. And that's going to change, probably different uses in different locations. But when you take more of the value that's when feasibility is reached, then you could also be slowing down the time that it gets there. So there's that dynamic you got to kind of think about.
All right, let's, I see Justin Zucker has raised his hand. And Justin, if you have a question, let's go ahead and take you.
Yeah, just to segue from Linda's comment, did that feasibility analysis, if an state density bonus project was piggybacked with the ZIP incentive, would that then be feasible in the current market conditions? Because I'm hearing that in current market conditions, neither the base nor the ZIP is feasible, and we're just waiting for a future time to come when it is. So I'm just wondering, is it possible in the current environment with the density bonus, layered on top to make a project feasible so that we could actually get something today?
Probably not, but the unknown here is if the density allowed by the California density bonus is not going to make the difference, because you can get quite a bit of density with the ZIP. What's the unknown, to answer your question, for the density bonus program is the extent to which using that program will allow significant regulatory concessions. In talking to developers, there are situations where the regulatory concessions, timing, no impact fees, variety of things can make a fairly significant difference. There's one example where they were able to build a high-rise building and a mid-rise building on the site next to each other as a result of all the various concessions. And when all was said and done, they put the affordable housing in the mid-rise building, which is a much cheaper construction building. And they did a lot of different things. It may be possible, although right now the gap for residential, the gap between revenues and construction costs is very large, and also the supply of existing unrented units is pretty big. But that the real question of what, and that's why I think we conclude that at some point, if not today, but maybe it could be today if that's significant enough, putting that California density bonus on top, what will probably make it work has to do with the fact of whether that particular development can redesign, do whatever development concessions, get whatever development concessions they can. That will probably make the difference. But I'd
Great,
say
thank you, Linda.
that's not a today thing as much as,
No.
but it could be sooner. Yes.
So I do want to point out there have been a couple questions in the chat having to do with understanding even more about what fees get collected, not only the affordable housing fees, but also CIP fees. And I think we, based on what I'm seeing in the chat from Joanna and Ed, I think we are going to try and answer those questions with some further research. And then there was one other question that Tiffany asked that I want to ask of maybe it's Joanna, maybe it's Laura or Neil. Is it necessary to build all of the densities and all of the housing units foreseen in the DOSP in order to reach the DOSP's goals? Or is it possible that a lower number, what if half as many new units are built or 3/4 as many units are built? How would that fit with the city's housing goals? Joanna?
Yeah,
Laura?
that's a good question. I don't think we've looked at that specifically. We could take a look at the housing elements goals. I mean, the challenge is that those are not broken down to the downtown specific plan area, but we do know that more units tend to be built in the downtown. However, affordable units tend to be not built in the downtown. They are built in the downtown, but the higher land costs make it less feasible to build affordable units there. But we can take a look at the draft general plan housing element goals and see where they would fall in line with sort of the maximum scenario here versus lower.
So that's another question we could try and get back to folks about. So we're coming right up on 7:30. Jeff's hand is up, and maybe we'll take Jeff for the last question. And then I'm going to suggest, with the consent of staff and others, maybe we'll formally end the Q&A part of the meeting, but stay on for another 15 or 20 minutes if people do want to give oral comments that they want to make sure that we're aware of. There have been comments in the chat as well, but I want to make sure that people feel an ability to share their comments orally also. And we'll take Jeff and Joanna, before we go to other comments, maybe you can put up again the slide about next steps, just so people understand where we're headed. So 3 parts. Part 1 is Jeff's final question. Part 2 is a summary by Joanna of next steps. And then part 3 will be some final comments from anyone who wants to make them before we close. Jeff?
Thanks. So I want to zoom back and sort of focus on the big public policy question. This plan is supposed to be focused principally on equity, and one of the big equity issues is about closing disparities. And one of the big disparities in the city is that we have been producing a lot of market rate housing, twice as much above moderate income as our RENA called for, and 8 units of market rate housing for every 1 unit of affordable. So I think the question we want to ask about the DOSP is, what is the DOSP going to do to address that disparity and actually move us to a better balance between affordable and market rate housing? Or as somebody in the chat said, are we going to end up with a less diverse downtown with a glut of market rate units and a dearth of affordable units and more displacement pressures? Because that will not meet the equity goals of the plan.
Right, thank you. I think that was more a comment than a question. That's fine.
I mean, I
think the question for the city is, how does this actually advance the equity goals?
Yeah, if I can respond to that, at least in part. So, as I mentioned earlier, the plan talks about finding multiple ways and tools of providing affordable housing funds. So the affordable housing infrastructure bond that is up is another large way of providing additional monies that can help implement the Downtown Oakland Specific Plan by providing additional monies for affordable housing projects that could be built downtown. So that is something that I think could help a long way in achieving that goal. But I think that's been, as you know, and probably most people know, one of the biggest challenges of the city is having enough funding to pay for affordable housing. And that's something that is, statewide a problem. And part of that is, the state, as we know, took away redevelopment funds, and we've been as cities trying to figure out ways to provide that money. But that is, so that is the challenge. And I think the city is trying to find a number of ways to do that. And, in addition, we are looking at doing on-site affordable. I think that is part of what can happen. So even if someone does the density bonus program, whether it's on the base and provides affordable as on-site, or as part of on top of the ZIP, they can also provide on-site. But as you also know, Jeff, by doing that, often, you're not necessarily, the on-site is not providing necessarily extremely low affordable. And that's really provided more by the affordable housing trust fund monies. Because in addition, you also need ongoing subsidies for that. As well as, I think to Linda's point with these high-rise buildings, generally it's not gonna pencil out as much to build on-site as part of a high-rise building. So, and typically if that happens, like with the BART projects, they build a separate low-rise building. So it's gonna have to take, a number of different things, both monies and on-site projects, and monies that can be leveraged to build in downtown and continue to downtown. And I think there's discussions in the plan about, with the housing department, the way through their NOFAs, prioritizing projects that happen in downtown. And yeah, so it's a combination of things. So this, zoning in and of itself and the ZIP program in of itself, can't do it alone. We have to look at multiple ways of doing that.
All right, thank you for that answer. Thank you, Jeff, for raising that. Let's go to Joanna for a summary of next steps, and then we'll open it up for any other final comments that people want to make.
Yeah, I'm also putting a link in the chat. I just put it there to our survey. We're trying to track who's participating in the meetings. So if you could please, not the individual, I don't think you have to put your email address in, but just generally we're trying to track the demographics and where people are from. So if you could fill that out, that would be very helpful to us. And I am going to share the next steps. So we talked at the last meeting, here's the next steps, about having an additional study session on affordable housing and the zoning incentive program. I think we got some more of the questions answered this time, but we know that this is complicated and might require one more session. We are going to be doing those online and chalkboard surveys. We did send out the online survey to our mailing list. If you didn't get it, please contact me. And if you so desire, please forward that to anybody you think might be interested in filling out the survey. And we will be putting those chalkboard surveys up in the next few weeks. We'll be collecting those through as we keep moving forward with the stakeholder meetings. We're setting up the dates for the Black Arts Movement and Business District, Chinatown and Art and Garage District, hopefully meetings, and we'll send those out as well. And then I guess the sort of question is like, do we think we need another CAG meeting? Do we think the Affordable Housing Zoning Incentive Program study session will suffice for that? So I guess the question around that is, are there other topics that will require the participation of the entire CAG, or is it really just that piece of it? So I guess that's a question for anybody who wants to maybe drop that in the chat. And then we shared the presentation. So if you need links to more information about the videos, the summary of changes, the zoning incentive program, the work that Linda has done on the economic reports and the comparison with the state density bonus, that's all available at these links. Yeah, I will stop there.
All right, thank you. We do have one comment in the chat from Naomi saying it would be good to have another CAG meeting that's specifically oriented to dialogue between the developers and the community members, community groups. So that's an interesting idea that I'm sure staff will consider. So with that, I'm going to end the official part of the meeting, but all of you who want to stay on are welcome to do so. And anyone who would like to raise their hand, I think I'd like to limit it to one go round per person of about 2 to 3 minutes. But anyone who'd like to raise their hand would be welcome at this point to provide any additional comments beyond what you've already said verbally or put in the chat, comments about any portion of this. Anybody who would like to do that? Maybe everybody wants to go eat their delayed dinner. I don't see any hands going up right now. James, and then Christopher Buckley. James, you may be muted. And while James unmuting himself,
I'm here.
Tiffany said in the chat she feels like she's still learning, and that may be why some folks don't have comment yet. And we'll certainly we want to make sure everybody gets educated and then have lots of time to give comments once that's occurred. So James, you go ahead.
All right. I think the ZIP program is still a work in progress. Still too many questions. It's very unclear and how it would work, how it's going to be administered. I just think it's not ready. It's not ready yet. And so I definitely think we need more intense study of that, or even the ZIP needs to see what alternatives it would consider instead of ZIP. But I still think that's a very problematic program, and it's not leading to equity. It's not leading to increasing racial equity and disparity in the downtown. It's to me, at this point, it's just not ready.
So you'd probably like us to look at other ways, whether it's more capture of more value or other programs that could be funded through it, something else to seem like it's more oriented towards equity.
Yes, definitely.
Great, okay. Chris Buckley.
I'm following up on a proposal I had in the chat. You had asked if there's another CAG meeting would be advisable to discuss other issues. And a strategy that Oakland Heritage Alliance has been offering for quite a while, which I alluded to earlier in the response to the SB 8, SB 330 issue, was the strategy of increasing the intensity in certain base intensity by right intensity in certain areas, that is upzoning, to compensate for downzoning elsewhere so that there's no net loss. And as I mentioned, Oakland Heritage Alliance has identified some areas preliminarily that we think might be appropriate for base upzoning. And at the same time, we've identified areas, historic areas in particular, that are already way too high, that need more protection and should be downzoned in compensation. And at the same, and there may be other areas too that should be downzoned in order to make the ZIP program feasible to, among other things, avoid this increase in cost that Linda was discussing due to changes of construction type. So we were hoping to run these specific proposals by staff preliminarily. We've already actually shared them with the CAG, particularly the areas to be downzoned, a couple of years ago and repeatedly. And we've presented the areas to be upzoned preliminarily, but we'd like to get staff's take on that and maybe work with them to come up with something that maybe staff thinks will work. And then we could share it with the CAG and see what the CAG thinks. Does that seem like a reasonable strategy?
Well, I think we should leave it to Joanna and her team to come back about that. But I think that we're now talking about 3 possible future CAG meetings. There's one to talk about the ZIP and housing. There's a second one to talk about, I was on the tip of my tongue. There's the third one to talk about what Chris just suggested. Oh, and a second one to talk about, to have the developers meet with community members. And then a third one to talk about possible downzonings to be offset by some actual upzonings instead of just the ZIP program. So that would be 3 separate meetings. I think staff will have to figure out if it is possible to do all of those. But Chris, I think your point is well taken. There will also, I'm sure, be timing issues to try and get this wrapped up this year. So it may not be possible to do that many meetings. Maybe there's a way to combine a couple of those agenda items. We'll have to see about that. I see Naomi's hand up. Joanna, before we go to Naomi, let me just ask, Jeff asked the schedule for future meetings. Can you look at maybe you go ahead and look at Jeff's question. We'll hear from Naomi and then go to Joanna for a question from Jeff about the schedule. Naomi? Naomi, you may be muted.
Hi.
Gonna be a little bit.
2 things. One, we have repeatedly asked for folks to take a look at the Emeryville program for the specific reason that they have a point system for granting density benefits, and there's a floor there, which is that at least 50% of your points have to be from housing. I personally feel like with a large project, if somebody throws me a couple of restrooms, that's nice, but I still want some affordable housing. It may be that that has to be different depending on the magnitude of the project. But, you know, really the cries for public restrooms and for streetscape improvements, which in my view should be paid for some other way, those things really aren't on the same level as providing affordable units downtown. They're not anywhere near the same scope and importance. And so I would just ask that people think about that a little bit. And the second thing I wanted to say is, yes, we're pressed for time. I noticed the ZUC got postponed for some or canceled or something. And the CAG hasn't met in 2 years. So we've met, our little group has met, but it's not really the fault of the public that the so-called Community Advisory Board has not met. And I don't want to be mean about it. I know that the city is really busy and that the staff is really shorthanded, but I feel like to some extent, there's been a community disengagement process. And I don't think we should actually allow that if these are significant moves by the city to restructure our downtown, the zoning, the regulations, and provide incentives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naomi. Joanna, do you want to look at the question posed by Jeff about schedule, and is there any part of that we can
Yeah,
answer?
and that relates to Naomi's question as well. She sort of mentioned the ZUC meeting. So we canceled the ZUC continuation meeting, and that was explicitly so that we could continue having these conversations. The reason the ZUC meeting had been continued was so that it could sort of bookend the community conversation. And we didn't see any reason in having a continuation that wasn't actually going to bookend the community conversation. So that's why we don't have a concrete date yet, because we're still scheduling those other stakeholder meetings. We know that we need to have another CAG or affordable housing meeting to cover those topics that David summarized earlier that you've all raised. So that is why we don't have, that was why we canceled the ZUC meeting, and that's why we don't have a concrete schedule yet, but we are working on it and we will send it out as soon as we can, knowing that, yes, this is the first meeting of the CAG meeting in quite a while, even though we've had the other public meetings to which we've been inviting the CAG. But yes, we'll be setting up some further meetings to discuss these, because as we've said, agree with James, there are some issues that are still yet to be determined about the zoning incentive program. This was a draft with the idea that we were taking together everything that we had heard from the community as we developed the plan itself, and we were going to try and come up with something that we thought worked. It took a lot of analysis, because actually we wanted to go beyond. We did actually look at the Emeryville program earlier on, and we wanted to go beyond what they had done and really back it up with some solid economic analysis, which is why we brought Linda on. And actually we're open to that idea. Maybe we require 50% of the benefits be affordable housing before they move on to the other benefits. That's something we can talk about as well. But so yes, there will be additional discussion. We'll be working out a schedule and we'll send it to you as soon as we get it nailed down.
All right, Neil Gray from city staff has his hand up. Neil, I'll call on you, and then before we call on Neil, let me just say that I don't see any other hands raised for final comments. If there aren't any, Neil will have the last word, and then we'll close the meeting unless we get another hand or two. Neil?
Thanks. Actually, I'm going to give the last word to Brian Mulry. This is just sort of addressing Jeff's comment about SB 330 and that we're not allowed to downzone, but there's an exception for affordable housing. I was wondering, Brian, could you address that? We talked a little bit about this, but it'd be great if you could clarify kind of what qualifies as an exemption and what doesn't qualify as an exemption.
Sure, sounds good. And just to remind everybody, we did answer this question in our first round of FAQs. So I would encourage people to go revisit that. It is posted on our DOSP website. But we've actually surveyed other jurisdictions and other city attorneys' offices regarding that provision. And this is the provision that basically provides an exception to downzoning with the intention of creating affordable housing. That would not apply to the hope that we get density bonus projects, because first of all, that would swallow up the whole rule, right? You could basically downzone anywhere in the city that just say, well, it's going to be because we hope to get density bonus projects out of these developers. So it would the exception would swallow the general rule. And then also there are instances where downzoning or limiting the zoning can actually encourage certain types of affordable housing. These examples would be like SROs, which we do have quite a few in the downtown area, where we could limit the zoning in order to protect and preserve single room occupancy developments. Also, if we ever did come around to doing inclusionary housing, there could be a situation where we want to limit the zoning to allow for an inclusionary housing project. Those instances are more specific than simply the conjectural hope that if we downzone throughout the city, that conjecturally or potentially will result in density bonus projects. So the opinion that our office takes is that the exception does not apply in order to induce density bonus projects. I've checked with other city attorneys' offices too, and they share the same opinion.
Great. Brian, thank you so much for that. I think it's a complicated and very complicated question, so I'm glad you could go into it for us. I think that's probably it for tonight. It's 7:50. I don't see other hands up. I think we've had a great discussion. We've heard a lot of concerns. We've been able, I hope, to answer some questions, and we will have at least one, if not a couple more meetings to be sure that we get even more questions answered and can take more comments. And for now, I just want to thank you for your time and say goodnight, and we will be in touch with additional meeting times and steps. Thank you very much. And Joanna's put